We've got Nicole, Kim, Hugh, in case you're not quite sure what order they should go in. Do you want me to do a short introduction of you each?
Very short.
I'll do very short. So here, Nicole, who you will have seen yesterday doing a paper, who manages the Australian branch of the Biodiversity Heritage Library. She's a zoologist and a science communicator. She just got back this week from Scotland, presented a paper yesterday and has returned for an encore for this leadership panel. Next we have Kim, who you may have seen in full flight earlier today. She's a university librarian at Auckland University of Technology. She's an Indigenous intersectional feminist and a librarian. She's well known to probably practically everyone here due to her joyful, vibrant and generous social media presence. And last but not least, we have our dear Hugh, who is Acting Associate University Librarian at Trobe University, very well known to the VALA community, committed to making learning resources more open and inclusive. So that's our three panellists, and we're sorry that Leanne wasn't able to make it today. So what we're going to do is, I think that these people will just do it for me and I'll just sit back and enjoy with all of you. But we're going to open with the provocation, which is, if leadership is a cauldron, what is the fire under that cauldron? So Nicole, would you like to start?
So I was talking about this question with my husband last night, and my first reaction was, it's chocolate, obviously. My husband and I are both grant funded, so he said, surely it's the money and the applications for the money and our constant reporting on the money. And I thought, no, perhaps the money is the cauldron itself, and the fire underneath is the why. It's what I have to, the reasons that I get the money, which is the amazing kind of work that we do, and the motivation behind that, and then of course what I have to report on after that. So I think the why for me is the fire, but also chocolate.
Excellent. Kim?
The fire for me is that I work in a place that helps people to thrive, and I work in a university that has lots of Indigenous and Pacifica students, where we get the biggest number in terms of percentage, University of Auckland people, of those student cohort, and being able to make a difference to their lives and help them to thrive, and then they take that back to their whānau and their iwis and their hapu and do really good things in community. And I think many of us became librarians because of the social capital that we help to build, that we're part of. So for me, the fire is building community.
So got a lot of purpose. Hugh?
Well, originally I interpreted this question completely differently to my two colleagues. And I was sort of thinking, okay, well, am I in the cauldron? Am I in the soup? And what's the fire that's boiling the soup, And I thought, okay, so that's everybody's expectations, including my own, And when you're a leader, you've sort of got to manage, because all the expectations are different, of course. So I thought that's the fire. But having listened to the wiser words over here, I think libraries are one of the most amazing technologies that humans have ever created. And I really want to make that technology work amazingly for people. So that's the fire for me.
Yeah, so that's a lot of meaning and purpose and altruism in the whys, I think. Yeah. So I think that I will then go to a question around, clearly, Kim spoke earlier in her keynote about the times we're in. So in a time of great and unexpected change, how do you, as a leader, respond to those circumstances? So what are your priorities when everything seems uncertain and uncharted? Who would like to start with that one?
I'll go around again. For me, it was really putting the people first. So, I mean, I'm from Melbourne, declared the world's most locked down city in October last year. And we went into lockdown many times. And I had to send my staff and my volunteers home every time. And often we didn't get much notice. So we would get an announcement from the Premier at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon saying at midnight, you're going to be locked down. And I sort of, witnessed a lot of other people going, right, we need to make sure that we can work from home and go and gather all your work and make sure that you've got everything on disk and that you can access. And I was like, no. The most important thing is you need to go home. You need to make sure that you and your family have everything you need. And whether that involves you going to visit your parents today or, do whatever you need to gather things so that you and your family can be safe and well and mentally well as over the next couple of weeks, couple of months, whatever it's going to be. And I think that for me was the most important. Forget about the work. Make sure you're okay. We'll work out the rest after that.
So that's seeing your team as whole people, and that whole thing of you can't separate work and home. It's all part of one.
Yeah, I mean, it's putting on your life raft, or you're getting in a life raft, making sure you've got your life jacket on. If those people fall apart, I mean, I know as digital professionals, I've witnessed so many places say, right, we have to switch our entire institution to online today because we're going into lockdown and no one can come into our institutions. I mean, I work at a public institution at Museums Victoria where we're usually open to the public, and there was a massive pressure to switch to our entire museum is now online. We now need to support our audiences and make sure people engage with our museum virtually. And of course, it's the technical people, the digital people who had all of that pressure and all of that responsibility and also the pride of showing off our organisation. But it was a massive amount of work at the same time as we were going through such a kind of psychologically kind of traumatising period, both personally and work-wise.
And Kim, you weren't here, but you certainly had your own lockdown experiences. So what did you then prioritise in that? Because part of the issue is, certainly here, it was something's happening today, but we don't know whether that's for a week or 2 weeks or 3 months. Right. So it's very uncharted and very uncertain and unlike anything that we have experienced before. So what were your priorities in that uncharted waters?
Liminal, uncomfortable spaces are something that you kind of get used to in leadership. And I think for those of us that work in higher education, it feels like there's always something. I know the pandemic is kind of unusual, but we're used to having to respond quickly to things. So for me, it was really having I call them circles of niceness, and people who've heard me speak before would have heard me talk about this, but you've got to have people around you that can just listen to you rant or vent. Kind of also pull you into line sometimes when you're not, some of your thinking is kind of off kilter. I really like to sound things out with people, so sort of like trusted people really help to get me through. And the way we did it in our workplace is essentially we had a very well-oiled system of, emergency committees and things, kind of everything came from the centre, and you just have to go with that in the uncertainty. Like it's hard. We lost a lot of our autonomy, but we couldn't confuse people with too many messages because it was confusing enough out in the world. So you just have to trust that the organisation and all the planning we do around emergency management and the health, safety and wellbeing and occupational health is going to work. And, on the whole, it mostly did. Like, it's just incredible what we've been able to get through together. So it's also that thing around, we call it kind of tuakana and taina. Sometimes you will be the learner and you'll be learning from somebody else, and sometimes you will be the leader. And we just had to hand over a lot of that power, for a better word, that we often have in our workplaces to other people, and just trust that they were going to help us all to stay safe in these turbulent waters. And we have to do that a lot just because you've got a name that says you're in charge or a role, doesn't mean that you always get to be in charge, because we're part of a big, complex ecosystem. Whether you work for council, whether you're funded, whether you're in a university, and we're always have somebody that we are answerable to, whether it's, and I always think that's your teams, to be honest, but there's also the rest of the university, and the university is answerable to council. We're funded publicly. So there are a lot of people who are actually our boss. And we've got to be mindful of that, and especially when you're spending public money. So, we have a strong duty of care for our people, but we're also accountable in many ways. So, yeah.
So, Hugh, do you feel like that circles of niceness, or some having to lean on and be leaned on, kind of duality applied to your experience as well?
Oh, definitely. And I think when you're in what feels like chaos, there were a lot of interesting leadership discussions going on, through early COVID, I'll call it. And I heard a lot of people say, well, there were people who urgently wanted someone to give them all of the answers and tell them exactly what was going to happen. And there were people who said, oh no, that's impossible. And I thought, there's got to be some middle ground here. So there's all of these things we can't control. And we've really got a duty to say, we can't control that. Like, I know you want me to tell you what's going to happen over here. I can't tell you. But at the same time, there are things we can control. And I think in that situation, leaders really need to be able to say, these things are not going to change. That we can control these things, and I'm going to give you something solid to hold on to. But you've got to recognise that these other things are out of our control. But the other thing that I noticed a lot of, some good leadership I've seen is, and we've seen a lot of people talk about this at this conference, was making it really clear what their expectations were of the people they were leading, and being very explicit about the fact that that had changed. So, don't worry about that 5-year plan we created 6 months ago. Like, forget about it, that's gone. This is what we expect of you in the next day, week, month.
Yeah. So you're talking about finding that certainty or the solid ground when everything's shifting.
Yeah. And there's something. It might not be much. Yeah. But
and there is always something.
There's always something, and humans need something. We don't deal well when everything is up in the air.
Our communities wanted libraries to be open. Like, I know so many people in all the different sectors that were bereft when the libraries were closed. And, a lot of our, particularly in publics, they didn't have the skills, like they hadn't ever used online books before. And, they were clamouring to get back into spaces. So we had to, I'm going to use that word, pivot. Pivot to do things differently and, adjust our services. And most people got that we had to do what we had to do, and we're on board with that. The tricky thing is now navigating back to some kind of normal, and what you keep and what you let go and what the lessons are, I think.
And what's sustainable now.
Yeah.
So I think we were speaking earlier today about watching other leaders and learning from other leaders. So are there things that you have looked at in your career, or recent or past, about leaders where you've learnt things from, whether good or bad? We want to start with Nicole again. You'll regret sitting next to me.
I will. So we were talking about this morning. Obviously we've all started at the beginning and had a variety of leaders ourselves who were managing us. And for me, in my career, I still feel like I'm an early career person. I still feel like I'm a sort of an early leader. But for me, I certainly have had bosses who said, I don't want to know you've got kids. You're here at 9, you finish at 5, and your work and your life is separate. And I've had leaders that had said to me, of course you need to go to the kindergarten assembly at 10 o'clock this morning, because that's, of course what you need to be doing. And I trust that you'll make up the time. And I think that sense of trust is just so important, that we all have lives and those can't be separated completely from our work. And you need to be there for your family as well as you need to be there for your work colleagues. And you have to prop everyone up, your family and your work colleagues, but then they prop you up too. So it's that sense that you will, and I think that really resonated during the COVID pandemic. Everyone's working from home, and there was this certain sense of panic in various kind of bosses or HR people who were like, how do we know they're working? And of course there's that. How do you know that your employees are working? And if you give them that sense of trust and constantly kind of motivate people with that why. I talked about the why earlier, but didn't even say what it was for me. But the why for us is we're making biodiversity knowledge accessible online so that everyone can access it and build on the world's biodiversity knowledge. And we're making it available for free. So talking about that and congratulating and thanking the people that you're working for their contribution. And I feel like I just want to say thank you to librarians everywhere, because for me, what got me through COVID was being able to do click and collect at the library. And I got on my bike and rode to the library, and I still can't believe that I can go online and go, I want this book. It may not actually be in my local library, but someone's going to deliver it to my local library, and I can write it and go and pick up a physical book and say hello to a librarian. So that for me was awesome. So thank you to librarians everywhere. And saying thank you, I think, is a really important part of being a leader and being a good leader, and that sense of trust.
Kim, what about you learning from people who have been leaders for you?
I mean, I think the thing that leadership comes at all different levels, and what I was amazed by, well, particularly our frontline staff who opened the libraries and were there on what was the university frontline, doing customer service and opening up student spaces when everyone else was at home. And it kind of felt like, they were doing the hard yards, and they just got on with it and did it. And what we did at our university was we did EOIs, essentially. So we didn't expect the team that is usually the front line of customer service to come in and do it, because, for all sorts of reasons, family commitments, underlying health issues and stuff, not everybody could do that. But right across the library, people came in and staffed those spaces. Like, it was just absolutely amazing. And, they started okay, it's all right to come back on campus. We've got health measures in place, and I always admire people that can kind of lead from everywhere. You see it quite a lot in libraries. I see it a lot on social media, like that sharing whakaaro or ideas that kind of start things, or asking questions. I've been really fortunate that most of my mentors, formal mentors, have been amazing women. And, I get, I'm going to call it girl crushes, but I get crushes on, particularly strong women in leadership. And I mentioned our Prime Minister. I think she did an absolutely fantastic job, despite what your politics are. There was so many great things during that, that time. But I'm very fickle, and I have a short attention span. And I don't want to offend anybody by dropping names, but there are people in this room that I learn stuff off all the time. Like Hugh, who's sitting next to us here, what Hugh and the Kāri cast people have done, and giving an alternate voice to people in the libraries from all walks of lives and all kinds of different kinds of libraries. That is an amazing thing. To do that. And it was just a bunch of sort of unlike minds who wanted to do something different. It's absolutely fabulous. And, that work is still going on, and there's, people like Stephen and Chris. I can see people all around the room who are leaders, but would never call themselves leaders. And, we had that imposter syndrome moment this morning. We're going, why us? Why are we sitting up here? It probably could be anybody out there sitting here sharing how they just get through their work life, because, we all lead.
And there is something about, I was talking to my son recently, and he said that he thinks that everyone has a lens through which they view life, and he said that his lens is that selfish or selfless? So if I'm upset about this, is this because I'm being selfish or whatever? And I think my lens is vulnerability. Like, I admire people who show their vulnerability, but I think that Kim is just talking a little bit about ego, and that there is this conflict between ego and what might be true leadership. Hugh, what is your lens?
Wow. That's a bit unfair.
Throwing that one at me.
We didn't talk about this question earlier. I'm so sorry.
Okay, so I think my lens is responsibility. I was just thinking about this as Kim was talking, and because we had the imposter syndrome conversation, I'm resisting the urge to say that I don't deserve her to say nice things about me, like she just did. So I'm just going to set that aside. But I think Kim has just actually given us a really excellent demonstration of what I mean. So I think really good leaders, and leaders that people respect, and as Kim said, even if you actually don't necessarily disagree with everything they do or say, I think leaders are respected if they take responsibility for the things that others feel that they should be responsible for. And I think in this country we've seen the results recently of what happens when people don't feel like that, and that's all I'll say about that. But also, look at what Kim just did. She said, this other person has done this thing that I really think is great, and this person deserves respect for this thing they did. So there's also the flip side. You can't take responsibility for things other people have done.
It's a generosity of spirit.
Yeah.
Although I like it being about me some of the time.
You had it about you earlier. So now we'll go more pragmatic, and I'll start with Nicole again, poor woman. So what is something that you previously thought was too time-consuming to do as a leader, but now you say, I should try and make time for that?
And you prompted us with self-care, and we've had such incredible talks about self-care today, but I'm not going to say that. I'll say that for me, I went from 3 days to 4 days to 5 days a week during COVID, and I didn't know how I was going to do that with kids and responsibilities of house, and I got 2 kittens during COVID too, so that was a lot of time and responsibility there. But I actually took some time at the beginning of 2020 before I started full-time and said, I'm going to try and become more productive. And I read productivity books, and I read the book, the 4-hour week, and I'm like, wouldn't that be amazing? But I thought, there's no way I can rock up to my government organisation and go, I'm just going to work 9 till 1. And, you guys can trust that I'm the most efficient person in the world. But I thought, at least I can try and be more efficient. So I took some time to kind of become more productive, which involved doing some at the beginning of the day, you write like 3 things down that you're going to achieve. And if you achieve those things by the end of the day, then yes. And if you don't, it's okay. So kind of being a bit realistic about what you can manage, because I pretty much felt like I worked full-time already, even though I worked 3 days a week, and I probably did, like most people with kids. But yeah, it was that juggle and trying to balance work-life. I'm like, I also have to demonstrate an increase in productivity if I'm going full-time. So how do you do that if you already feel like you haven't got a single minute spare? And so it was that. It was, try and become more organised, just take some time to kind of reflect on your processes and your workflow, spend some time planning. And it is incredible how much actually having like 20 minutes of focus time at the beginning of the day actually makes you more productive. And going for a walk at lunchtime makes you more productive. Putting the washing on like in between Zoom meetings, or even like making sourdough during the staff meeting with 500 people where you don't have to be on video, I made some sourdough also for about 2 months. And then, but yes.
Excellent. So Kim, what about you? Is there something that you now make part of your leadership toolkit?
I think it's the walk around. I don't know what else you would call it. I'm not particularly good at it because I am naturally a shy person and I have to kind of force myself to do it. But it's that one of my colleagues, sort of the first thing that they do when they get into work is they walk the floor and go and say hello to everybody in their team and even people that are not in their team. And I really admire that. She's like the biggest extrovert ever. But it's really important because I mentioned whakawhanaungatanga, which, you know, building relationships, building shared experiences. There's real power in the hello and goodbye, and people notice when you don't do it. They feel excluded. So even when I walk in, I might not go down there, but I'll yell down the corridor if I see someone, you know, morena, atamarie, nice to see you. And that is really important because it sets the tone and the culture. And, you know, I will try and learn everybody's names. I'm so bad at it. And we've had a few new recruits lately, apologies. But that stuff is really important because you actually cannot connect to people if you don't know their names. You can fake it, but it's much better if you know who people are. And I have to work at that. But it makes such a difference to the culture of a place if you do it.
Hugh, have you got something that you try really hard to spend time on?
I feel like I have nothing to add now because those are the things I've been thinking about recently. I'm also, you know, I'd be quite comfortable just going and hiding in an office somewhere and, you know, communicating with everybody over text messages. So I have to sort of force myself not to do that. But yeah, I think the big thing I've learned through the COVID experience is how I've always been a bit cautious about what I felt was prying into people's personal lives too much at work. I've always been a bit worried about that. You know, not that I'm not interested, but I didn't want to sort of force people to tell me things they didn't want to. But I think through the COVID experience, I've realised how valuable it is for all of us to know a little bit more about each other and what's going on in our lives outside of work and how that might have, you know, why was that person a bit grumpy at me this morning? You know, not to take it personally, or maybe you should, I don't know. But yeah, just knowing more about each other it just makes you more of a person, but it's also makes us all work together much better.
Yes, and I think you were saying this morning, Nicole, that being on Zoom without a background on when people can see your lounge room or your spare room or your bedroom or whatever is very levelling, isn't it? But also exposes a bit of privilege sometimes, you know. That,
and we also learnt much more environmentally friendly not to have that virtual background on.
You've got permission.
Yeah. And I certainly kept mine off most of the time, and it was partly a conscious decision. I did clear the space, like I often had laundry like in the background. I'm like, okay, meeting, take that away. And as I said, I did get 2 kittens during COVID, and that was quite a leveller in terms of, you know, having the meetings. They were quite, you know, they'd sometimes hoik up the back of my chair and appear over my shoulder, and they certainly kept us sane, but I think it also broke the ice. I started a global international working group, global and international, amazing, working group during COVID with people I'd never met before in real life, most of them. And we've been meeting every week for 22 months or something now. I met them for the first time in person last week in Scotland. Wow. And it was amazing because I feel like I knew them really well. We've been in each other's living rooms for talking, and we talked a lot. I really did make the beginning of those meetings kind of, you know, they're 6:30 in the morning for me, so I'm a little bit, so actually talking about personal things actually wakes me up a bit. But I feel like we've talked about our family and our work and our, you know, how, you know, really asking the "Are you okay?" really kind of questions. And we've all been through a lot, and, you know, a lot of these people are from the States or Europe, and so we're all going through slightly different experiences. But then I met them in person and I kind of had this, I had no idea how tall you were or kind of how you walk, like even just the personality and how they dress from the waist down. Like it was just, it was really lovely, and I think it was just so delightful to see them in person. But also those are the people that I've kind of sadly spent more time with over the last 2 years than anyone else, which is kind of crazy. But yeah, having that background of, you know, they've been in my house every week.
Now, someone on the Q&A has said, which is kind of circling back to that vulnerability question, how do you in leadership roles manage your own dropping the ball moments, especially during a crisis like COVID? So I don't know who wants to take that one first.
I can take that. Mm-hmm. I've just started admitting it. Which was a new thing for me, you know, after a little while of thinking that I had to be perfect. And I thought, no, actually, thinking about leaders I respect, they tell people, they say, oh, look, I really stuffed that up. I'm really sorry about that. And this is my plan for fixing it. How do you feel about that? And I always think that's the best approach with things like that. Well, you know, sometimes you've got to apologise if you've stuffed up really badly. Yeah. Had the bad day, you know, but... And
the impact that has on your own team means that it's okay for them to stuff up too?
Exactly. Yeah.
I still remember when I started in customer service at the Oregon Zoo about 25 years ago. They had, I mean, I think the US has a really strong customer service ethic. If you've ever kind of shopped or been to a restaurant in the States, you get very good service. And yes, it's tip driven. That's their fire under the Cauldron. But they said, you know, the key to customer service, which I think is the same for leadership, is listen, apologise and make it right. And that's really resonated with me ever since in everything I do, even, you know, with raising kids or being in a relationship or with friends and family. That's the first thing. You first listen, and then you've got to, you know, you apologise, even if it's not necessarily your fault, or you know, and then you try and do whatever you can to make it right.
Recently, one of our senior leaders from the university left, and she got quite emotional, and she said, if you sniff, you can't cry at the same time. And I think, you know, I don't like crying in front of people, but that sort of stuff happened during COVID because there was a lot of emotions. I think it's just admitting that you have emotions, having a moment, and then just getting over them. Because it also, like we've discussed, it gives people permission to have emotions too. But it's how you handle that. I thought she did that really graciously because I'd be mortified if I started crying in front of a whole heap of people. It's, you know, that's like one of my kind of biggest fears of doing that. And I have done it before. So, yeah, I think it's that step back, give yourself a moment to kind of regroup and then just keep going. That's a really valuable, you just keep going. That's what we have to do. And then remember that time, and next time you won't make the same mistake. Yeah. Well, you probably will. You know, it'll probably happen time and time again, you know, but you know what I mean. That's the theory behind it, isn't it?
So I've got one provocation, which is going back to the cauldron. So what situations require throwing things into the cauldron? They didn't say people, they just said things. So is that giving something up, or
potion you're trying to make?
Yeah, it's the cauldron, your mixing pot, in which case you need the people and the funding and the ideas, you know, and the risks and all those things in the cauldron, as well as.
And a bit of fun.
And a bit of fun, yeah. Actually, we just recruited, and that's actually the last question that we asked in our interviews was, what do you do to bring fun to the teams you work in? Which people said was a really strange question.
That is a great question.
Well, what can you do? I think we said, what do you bring to a team to make it more functional and fun? And that actually stumped a whole lot of people. Yeah, what do you do to put the fun in functional? Actually, my colleague, Cerise Howard, actually asked it in that way many times. We swapped her. She asked the question in a much more fun way than I did. But it actually stumped a lot of people, and some people who didn't answer that, who just sort of went, we were like, well, we're not hiring you.
So, because I actually, maybe this is my negative mindset or something, because I envisaged that question as throwing things into the fire, but in fact they were talking about adding things into the cauldron, maybe. So much more positive spin on that than I was thinking. So I guess that is a throwing everything at it, or like, what do you think causes you in this kind of, what kind of situation are you just going to like, I guess it's a swift reaction, it's a on the fly type of thing?
You might not know this about me, but I'm sort of quite internally optimistic in public, and sometimes that really rubs people up the wrong way, particularly when you're dealing with difficult times. And you've got to kind of see that it's, the same way that you do things is not going to work all the time. And I think that's just, are we ever going to return to normal? Maybe we just need to throw that in the fire. Like, just get rid of that idea that we're going to go back to the way things were before. Do we really want to do that anyway? We just need to throw, things change. They don't stay the same. There's new leaders. There's new ideas. We have a whakatoki about acknowledging the past and moving forward together. And I think you have to do that. You have to pay due respect to what has happened and all the amazing things we've done in libraries before the pandemic. But the world is fundamentally different now. And that is opportunity. So, it's like we can be the phoenix rising out of the fire, or we could be the three witches around the fire, and, we could topple governments. I don't know. But it's the opportunity to do things different.
Yes, and so how do you help people to see the possibility in something that's confronting or that's difficult, like without seeming to be either a Pollyanna or someone who's naive or who isn't paying respect to the lived experience of the people in your team? So I don't know who wants to take that first.
Are the questions getting harder?
Yeah. Because I'm making them up now.
I'm asking for a friend.
You've got to listen to people. Who was it who said that before? Was it you, Kim?
No, for Nicole.
Must have been
Yeah.
Nicole. They might have a legitimate case, right? You might be like, oh, I am being naive. But they also might be worrying about something that you can potentially reassure them about. I was about to say that doesn't exist, but you definitely wouldn't say that, right? It exists for them. So I'm always interested in trying to work out why people think the things they think. They're not necessarily wrong, but if you want to change their mindset, you've got to, empathise. Well, try to empathise.
Yeah. So, Nicole, did you find in your organisation that because you had to have such a big change in your service, that was it easy to bring people on that journey to say, let's make an opportunity out of this?
I've got a small team of staff and a large team of volunteers, and then this kind of global network of. So my primary leadership is for this international committee, but just on the kind of, on the front, I had volunteers knocking on my door within days of probably even the next day, and for them, a lot of those volunteers are really elderly as well, and they were seriously isolated over COVID. And I felt the most important thing, so I was like, I had all these grand ideas about we're going to switch to like making content discoverable, and I'm going to start this international committee finally because we've got this opportunity to do this. But actually it was my home team and my staff and my volunteers that I had to look after first. So before I even did any of the things, so I was like, oh, this is an amazing opportunity. It was making sure I had meaningful work for them. And a couple of our volunteers said, you kept us off the streets, and I mean, they actually couldn't go much out onto the streets, only 5K anyway, but they were off the footpath. And it really was, it was lovely for me as well. I mean, all my volunteers now have my mobile phone number, which I was a bit hesitant. I was like, oh, here we go, I'll never get that back. Which is actually, but it's been amazing, and I felt so, so privileged to be able to do that. And they always say that, I had someone say to me recently, it's actually, you shouldn't be trying to kill yourself to make work for the volunteers. Like, if there is no work, send them home. And I was like, no, they're my most important people. They give up their time, and many of them have been with this project for longer than I have, since it began. That so many of them were working, and when we sent them home, they said, actually, we know how to get into the museum, and I was saying this morning, they desperately wanted to come in. I'm like, you can't come in. They're like, yeah, we can. Like, no, we're there. And I was like, no, you can't. And I had to say the only people allowed in the building are the security guards and the people who are fixing the leaking squid tank. They are the essential workers in our museum. We have to stay home. So it was about feeding them. So what was the question?
I can't remember. Good answer, though.
Yeah. Hopefully I answered it.
Always time for a giant squid tank.
Yeah.
We've got questions pouring in now. So someone was asked, it's important to note that not everyone can or did work from home. And I think you touched on this earlier, Kim, about how as a leader did you support those people working on site through the pandemic? Yeah. And that is that, and I think a few of us have been chatting about that throughout the conference, that that differential between people whose job has to be face-to-face and other people who have the relative privilege of being able to work from home. So you were talking about that?
Oh, there's a question? Okay.
Yeah, there's a question. How did you support those people who had to be on site?
Well, we just acknowledged that that is part of the job. In kind of like the big lockdowns when nobody else was on campus, as I said, we had, people put an expression of interest in about whether or not they wanted to come on campus. And so just those who wanted to be there and felt safe and comfortable were there. And we felt that was the fairest way to do it. And it's been interesting going, because we're fully back on campus now in Auckland, and the expectation is that we work there most of the time, and that's come down through the senior leadership of the university, and we support that. But it's often the people in our kinds of roles, the professional staff, that are the ones that are there. And it's still really tricky to navigate. And I've spoken to a lot of people here that are doing this. How do you get people back? Is it fair? Why are these people working at home and these can't? Unfortunately, if you're in those frontline customer roles, the operational imperative is that you are delivering a frontline service and face-to-face. So we're all in higher education talking about vibrant campuses and vibrant life. We are the vibrant. And that's tricky. So it's just making sure that they feel safe, really. And being prepared to have those conversations about why they're there. Also, taking feedback on board, like, why can't they work from home? You've got to have those conversations, and they're tricky and uncomfortable, and, sometimes you have to say no to people. We don't like saying no to people. Librarians aren't particularly good at that. So, there's no simple answer, but you've just got to kind of work through it and come to a place where people are comfortable with the outcome. And all these things take time, and you're bound to, I was going to swear, annoy somebody. Yeah, like, you're not going to have an answer that is going to please all the people all the time. And that's one of the biggest things about management. It's actually one of the biggest things about being human. Like, if you think about all our own personal relationships, you can't feed it, like, we can't keep our kittens happy. So people are much more complex. Yeah.
I think it's also making people feel valued in that situation.
Yeah.
So in our level 3 lockdowns, I was able to get permission to have just our scanning technician at work. And he was one of the only people on site. And he was happy to be there and wanted to be at work because his primary role is to, access the physical materials and scan them. And we had material on loan from a lot of other libraries. So I felt, and we're also grant funded. So I'm like, okay, we sort of have this slight pressure to get that material back to those libraries, but also to have an output so that we get our grant funding for the following year. So I felt a bit of pressure about getting him back. But I also wanted him to know that he was basically our hero, keeping the project alive. And I made sure he knew that. And he was, we'd have our Zoom meetings and he would be Zooming in from work. And we'd be like, show us what you're scanning today. And, really make him feel valued and that he was doing that he was so appreciated and that he was doing really our core work. How can the rest of us support him from home? But also the second he felt uncomfortable being there or he was catching public transport to work, I'm like, you just, the minute you don't want to do this, the minute that you're feeling uncomfortable, we had, he wasn't a frontline worker doing this. I mean, it could just stop. But that was also, we value your safety and also we so value your work, and that kind of acknowledging your staff constantly and making people feel appreciated is such a basic thing, not just for leaders but for colleagues and family.
Hugh, at La Trobe, did you have any different experiences with those frontline staff?
Similar, yeah. Well, sort of a cross between the two, I guess. We obviously had the big Melbourne lockdowns. I think we probably closed our libraries for slightly longer than some of the other universities, but we were having constant conversations with our staff about what they might be asked to do in the near future, how they felt about that, what would make them not just feel safe but be safe. And I think by the time we had staff, we had a small number of staff on site all the way through. Our sort of, the ones who had to register themselves and get their permits and all. Obviously, there was things that needed to happen in the building, and again, yeah, they were our heroes. They were getting our, click and send delivery books out the door. Very small team of, I think it was 3 across multiple campuses. But yeah, when it came to bring in face to face again, by the time we did that, it was staff who had volunteered and who had been, provided with what they'd asked for. So that worked out quite well. And so really, it was just a process of keeping everybody informed and having continual conversations.
And this might be a question more directed at Nicole, but feel free to other people to answer it. There are lots of volunteers in the GLAM sector. So when you're leading volunteers, how is that different from leading other employees, or is it different at all?
I mean, I think it is different. I think you almost have to be more appreciative. Well, you do. You have to be more appreciative of the volunteers, and they're giving their time freely. And I'm so grateful that we have our team of volunteers, who, as I said, many of them have been there for longer than I do. Our institution is very careful about our volunteers and the fact that they're doing different work than the paid staff, and therefore they're not doing essential work. But so therefore that if you tell them that their work is invaluable, the museum is like, you can't do that, because it's not invaluable, because otherwise you'd be paying them to do it. And I had volunteers, I had one volunteer, the same volunteer who was trying to break into the building. He was the first one back. We managed to get him permission to come in November last year. And so when the rest of the volunteers came back in February, he came in every day to train them. And again, is that an essential work? And in fact, I got pulled up by my manager and went, why is he coming in? Why is he training your staff? I'm like, well, no one asked him to do that. But again, it's that, making him feel invaluable without saying, it's a balance. And again, we've got to be careful that they don't overcommit. I mean, he and a couple of others were doing incredible work from home, and I'm, half the work that that our project has put out is produced by volunteers. So we're incredibly fortunate, and they do train each other. And we do have. He said something awkward to me, where he said, "I hear the B team's coming back," and I'm like, but he's kind of right, and the other volunteers recognise that too. So, and we try and trying to make them feel valued in every way we can. But I feel that that's an important thing for your paid staff as well. And that, even that, I'm acknowledging that the conversations we've had this week, the opening keynote's still resonating with me about admitting that you're an amateur. And that word, the amateur, coming from the word to love. And sort of expressing that in front of everyone you work with is so important. I think we're all learning, and we certainly had a massive learning curve over the last 2 years. A time for us to step back and reflect on our workflows, and having those volunteers come back and having to retrain them effectively after 2 years. You know, they all picked it up again very quickly, but a time to actually go, well, were we doing things right back then? You know, are there better ways we can do it? And learning from them as well.
There's a question here about, it's kind of related to that sense of responsibility that you have as a leader when there's a time of crisis and change. So the question is, how did you or would you have liked to pace yourself so that it wasn't so overwhelming? So Hugh, do you want to start with that one? Or was it not overwhelming?
Well,
it was a
no, it was. So, well, sort of two answers to that. I think I didn't pace myself, but I was very clear with my team immediately that they needed to pace themselves. And, this has been the thing all through the conference, really. But, yeah, I was sort of like, look, I don't expect to get 100% productivity out of you or anywhere close to it, right? So let's just do the best we can. Because I knew that they would feel that they somehow were expected to just carry on and keep going, and even though they're working from their dining room table in their one-bedroom apartment, somehow they're going to produce the same amount of work.
With their 3 kids under 5.
With their that's right, with their 3 kids under 5.
So was there a moment where you realised that you weren't taking enough of a break? Or I'm a slow learner. So I somehow managed to, I grew up in Tasmania, and I somehow managed to go back to Tasmania for Christmas in 2020. It's just in that little gap where you could actually do that. It was actually the day that they cancelled all the flights to Sydney. And I realised I was just completely burnt out. I was trying to have Christmas with my family and play with my nephews, and I was just completely exhausted. And I thought, this is ridiculous. I need to start taking care of myself. So that was a bit of an epiphany for me. But it was also good for me to think about, well, is everybody else doing the same thing I've been doing? I need to pay more attention to help them to look after themselves. What about you, Kim? Did you have techniques to make it not so overwhelming?
I think it's about delegated leadership. Like you just can't do everything, and we've got a very lean leadership team, so there's 3 of us in the executive, and then we've got absolutely fantastic managers underneath. But it's that stuff around, it's not about ego, it's about getting the work done, and we're all in it together, and just delegate, but make sure you don't overload your people. So, the key committee to be on during that time was the emergency committee in the university, because that's essentially where all the decisions are making. I didn't go to that. One of my directors who looks after our spaces, Jill, went to those committee meetings, and she was absolutely fabulous. She thrives in that kind of environment. And, some people struggled, other people were freaking amazing. Like, just absolutely incredible. They just could handle all that kind of high-level decision-making, this, and then they could mobilise the teams to do whatever they needed to do. So if you know your team well, like Nicole was saying, what are their strengths? Everyone brings something to the table. You don't have to do everything. We had low contact Fridays, and I was kind of religious about that. So essentially what that meant was on Fridays, no online meetings for anybody, virtually no contact, and at least that was one day out a week where you weren't doing back-to-back kind of meetings and trying to make decisions about things.
And that was for the whole university. And of course, we did a learning management system implementation during that period, and our learning designers did absolutely incredible work, and it was just amazing. So some people couldn't do that, of course, but the intention was there, and many people tried to practice that. I still do that now. So on a Friday, I work from home, and that's my day to kind of like connect with what's going on. I do stuff that's related to my work, but not directly to the operational stuff. So I do stuff for Open Access Australasia, name drop, or Consul stuff, consortia stuff, that external networking that you just kind of don't seem to get time to do. And for me, that's one really good practice, and we've been encouraging people to do that sort of thing as well.
Yeah. So just on that, we at La Trobe, it was quite interesting. Our university senior executive just announced, sort of halfway through 2020, said, "Okay, there's a new meeting protocol," and they were a little bit loose about it, but effectively, it was, okay, well, you need to stop having back-to-back Zooms. Like, you just finish your meetings 5 minutes early. Does it really need to go for longer than half an hour?
Yeah.
And something else we implemented sort of accidentally because of COVID was for online meetings, everybody is on their own computer. And previously we'd had these on, because we're multi-campus, we'd always had online meetings, but it was often 2 people in a meeting room in Ballarat and 10 people in a meeting room in Melbourne, and of course the Ballarat people just watched the Melbourne people have a meeting, essentially. I'm sure we weren't unique in that way. And we haven't gone back. So pretty much all of our staff are on campus most days, but we have team meetings, and if one person is online, then everybody's online. And that's just the rule. And it's really changed the way our regional campus colleagues are able to operate with the rest of the library. It's been quite a culture change that's been really positive.
That's awesome. So Nicole, kittens, kids, leaking squid tanks, volunteers breaking into the building. So how did you make that all not become overwhelming?
I was thinking about the comments about dropping balls recently, and I think the whole concept of mental load, which hit me full on a couple of years into having kids, and the dropping the balls, I do feel, I have gone through periods of kind of peak frazzle where I feel like I've got so much in the air and I've just got so much going on that that I will let those balls drop. And I've always been a perfectionist, and I want to be the perfect mum and the perfect leader and the perfect friend and the perfect partner, and that just isn't always possible. And I did madly do these kind of productivity courses, and the whole concept of downloading your mental load, of getting it down on paper, and just those things that you need to do, and try. I actually found I went back to writing physical to-do lists, and just those 3 things each day that I needed to get, the most important things. It's kind of that concept again of, there's that metaphor of you put the golf balls in a jar first, and those golf balls are your most important things, the family, the friends, and your probably your self-care. And then you put in the pebbles, which are all of the kind of the things that have to get done, but they're not as important as the golf balls. And then you pour in the sand, which is everything else. But if you put the sand in first, the pebbles and the golf balls won't fit. So you kind of have to put and so you think about who are the golf balls, and sometimes those golf balls are the grant application. And I have thought again about the whole concept of putting your own oxygen mask on first, and for me those things are making sure there is enough money that the team will get employed next year. I'm on rolling 1-year funding, and I have been since 2014, and so are my staff. And I've always told myself the grant funded positions are the ones that do the best work, the fun work. Like if you just, otherwise you're in the Groundhog Day of just, whereas we get, we're on this amazing grant project. Keep telling myself that. But that concept that the most important things are, making sure we do employ, apply for funding to employ a new person, because that will eventually save us time. Make sure that we've got the resources we need for next year. Make sure my staff are okay, and that that we actually were all kind of functioning, particularly during COVID, checking in all the time. We went for having much more frequent meetings, shorter meetings, but more frequent meetings. And I feel like I've got to know my staff. I mean, I've worked at the museum in February, it'll be 20 years in the same organisation. And I've got to know my team better in the last 2 years than I have over that time. And I think it is partly that being vulnerable and sharing your own struggles. And then also I find that, that's also the kind of concept in friendship. You share what you're going through and other people share with you. And allowing yourself to expose some of that vulnerability in that, we're all kind of learning and adapting, and I don't know what the answers are. I don't know when we're going to be back at work. I don't know if we're going to be able to meet our targets this year, and it's actually okay. So, again, did that answer the question?
Absolutely. Beautiful. Sarah's giving us the wind up. Can we have somebody say their one takeaway? Yeah? One takeaway? That for a beginner manager, for your previous, your younger self, if you had
planned for this.
I told you to do one takeaway.
Oh God, I'm having a total mental blank.
Yeah.
Kim's got one.
Be kind. The library world is very small.
Good one. Do you have one takeaway for your younger self or for a beginning manager, beginning leader?
I feel like my head is full of all of the talks from this week, and I feel like I just want to pull all the things there, and my takeaways are like, perhaps then listen to your colleagues and learn about being an amateur and being vulnerable and self-care, and even just those two things. There are many, many things here. I love the two takeaways that came through from the virtual audience in Kim's talk, which were keep yourself sane by browsing library shelves, which I just love, always doing, and pat cats.
Yeah. Last chance, Hugh.
Ask another question, always.
Nice.
Beautiful. That is such a nice way to end. Thank you. So thank you all for your wisdom and generosity.